everybody. We'll try again. Okay, so here's the agenda for today. I'm going to go over some background, the occupational profile. We're going to review this methodology for assessing the rural workforce. Um, I'm going to present an alternative approach, some findings and next steps. Then we're going to have the Q&A. Since we're a cozy group here, that should be very good. And then we'll have a breakout group. I think we could just stay in our own group here instead of maybe breaking out. And we'll do the breakout questions. And then we have some other questions that ASAP would like to have answered. So, as I mentioned earlier, the goals for today are really for you to get familiar with this climate change adaptation and resilience specialist occupational profile, and for me to get feedback on this work. So ASAP has been doing a lot of great work, foundational work in developing the adaptation and resilience workforce. They've developed the JEDI statement, the code of conduct, the living guide, and this knowledge and competencies framework that has really driven a lot of the work we're going to show today, as well as a glossary. So last year, during the National Adaptation Forum, I worked with ASAP, and we had access to job postings data from a company called Lightcast. And we queried this data and presented it in these 4 buckets of years to participants at the workshop. And we had them work through this and provide a lot of information about what was missing. And we also surveyed them to see what their career paths were and to find out some of the soft skills they need to succeed in their roles. So that work, as you can see in this methodology chart, was pre-AmeriCorps, right? And so for this AmeriCorps grant, we had enough resources to actually pull all that data together and create this draft occupational profile. So we'll start there. So I don't know if you've seen the profile, but hopefully you have. It was in your resources, but let me put this in chat. Let's see, just Kyla, can you put that in the chat for me? The link, or has everyone seen this the profile? Oh, here it is. Okay, let me put that in chat. And you can follow along looking at that. So the reason why we do occupational profiles in workforce development is that it provides evidence. Evidence, in this case, because it's an emerging occupation, we need to have evidence of something happening. And I was working on this highway maintenance apprenticeship, and I went to the Wisconsin Workforce Development. It's the Department of Labor, has a different name in Wisconsin. And the director said, how do I know this problem exists? So you really need to go out and survey people and come back with the evidence. So this profile is a summary of that evidence that is founded in those job postings data that we got and from input from you guys. So it is a communication tool, and it serves as a roadmap for young people, for experienced workers who are coming into the field and need to know, hey, what do I need to learn to be to work in the climate adaptation space. And of course, it communicates to educational institutions and workforce systems how this occupation is a little different from sustainability or urban planning, but builds on those other occupations as well. So the key thing about the occupations is that they are, well, a lot of economic developers and labor, I guess the Department of Labor use the standard occupational classification codes for occupations. These are kind of broad classifications along the whole workforce, and and this is how we develop employment statistics. They're tied to this code. So this occupational profile sort of helps tie into those codes, so then we can monitor some statistics about this occupation. And of course, it's a career exploration and career pathway development tool. So let's go into let's just walk through this profile. And so let's start off with the climate change adaptation resilience specialist title. Well, I noticed that there was a sustainability specialist occupation, and it seemed sort of to sort of be it sounded like this is the specialist wording would be something that would be of, I guess it just focuses the occupation, that this is a specialized set of skills. So there's an introduction and background as to, for someone who does not understand or comes from, who doesn't understand what's been going on in climate, right? And then there's some information, some background information about ASAP and some of the other work that this work builds on. So so if you have seen the knowledge and competencies framework, there's a link to it here. And then there is also a link to the explainer, which was some work that was done by EESI on just what an adaptation job is. So that's a nice way to provide a full holistic understanding of this occupation. So it goes into next, but what do we mean by adaptation? And this is a concept that if you talk to anyone who's not in this field, it is a little hard to explain. I come from the transportation sector. So in transportation, we often call adaptation mitigation. So we know that lingo is different. So there's an example of from the infrastructure side that I've been working on as an example for adaptation. So the job demand ties into what we know about the legislation that's come forward, and we do explain that this is an emerging occupation, and there is no standard occupation, no code for this yet, and and then we also go into an occupational definition of this occupation. All right, so what's very important is to know, especially for the knowledge and training aspect of climate adaptation, we look at knowledge, skills, and abilities. The knowledge is something that is learned, right? There may be a skill associated with the knowledge, but not necessarily. And so some of the things we're still looking at are, for example, the knowledge of traditional or indigenous knowledge of adaptation practices. Okay, so what is that competency? What would that look like? So that has yet to be developed. All right, so let's go to the next page. So we talk a little bit about this knowledge and the weather-related hazards. And I've listed those and linked those. And so this then becomes a little bit of an educational part to those who are not used to looking at climate and climate hazards. The next section is the skills, and those are things that that can be measurable, that are you can be competent at those. We go into abilities, and then a list of sample tasks that somebody in this field would be undertaking. All right. So the next session is career pathways and progression. So in order to get to those occupational codes, we need to define those. And so this is a listing of what I would consider core people who are doing adaptation right now. And it may be, it's not the implementers, right? It's the planners. And so and part of this was looking at the information we pulled from the National Adaptation Forum and seeing where people came from, as well as some of my experience in working on projects in Wisconsin, and who that set a team, who made up the team, right? So climatologists, civil engineers. Now there's an occupation called the climate change policy analyst. And that one was actually it was actually called climate change analyst. And this showed up in the Occupational Information Network, which is called ONED. And that occupation, I just thought it was great because, there was no need to develop this, emerging career called the climate change adaptation specialist, because we had this climate change analyst. But then based on whatever partnership they have with, I'm not sure who, they changed this to a policy analyst. So the definition became a lot narrower. And of course, some of the things that we would like an adaptation person to do are not included in this description. There are links to all these occupations on the ONET. Okay, emergency management directors, hazard mitigation planners, those, I kind of consider those in there under that category. A lot of work is done in the natural environment, so environmental restoration planners, environmental scientists, hydrologists, landscape architects, sustainability specialists. Many people have come from the sustainability side, urban and regional planners, of course, and then water resource specialists. So these are the people who are taking on adaptation skills in their current job. So what we would see in the future is that once there's a whole full build out of the education system, I mean, every year there's a new program, a new university program, or a new certificate, or there's more training. And so until that adaptation occupation solidifies, this is what's going to happen, is that, people take on these skills. If you think about how a long time ago, we used to have typists, and then we had word processing documents. And so then we all became typists. The typists disappeared, and that became a skill that now it's a foundational skill, right? Okay, so that is kind of the meat of the profile for the assessment. So are these feeder occupations the right ones? Are these feeder occupations good for a rural community? So I did have a lot of conversations with people, mainly in my state, and I asked them, okay, from a data-driven side, could I say we could say that there's a certain occupation that we could upskill to do this climate work. And the situation is very it's unique in every rural area, right? So so this is an attempt to do more of a to kind of figure out what that target population might be in the rural areas. So I'm getting a little ahead of myself there. So let me finish this the profile. So we go on to education, and we list some sample education and training in the profile, and this would be built out by ASAP in terms of having a comprehensive list, and then career progression. So this is actually what we did at National Adaptation Forum. We broke these out into entry level, mid level, and then senior level. You have some job titles. These came out of job listings, as I mentioned, and the top skills that employers ask for in those jobs, as well as some of the salary that was there. So the salary ranges, not every job has a salary range. So we're thinking maybe we take this off because it's not comprehensive. And then we finally have some select professional organizations that are tied around climate adaptation. Okay, so all right, so in the breakout, we will ask these following questions. How should this occupational profile be modified for rural regions based on your experience? Are there other feeder occupations that should be used in rural regions? Are there organizations we should share this profile with? And do you have any partnership ideas? And how might you use this product? Okay, so now let's go into the methodology. So the question was, from my end, I needed to do a scan, and it's very hard to do a scan on something as wide as Workforce without having a specific project in mind or a specific location, right? So, but the big question was, how does ASAP from a okay, admit. Where do we build rural capacity? Who can we upskill? And what does the pipeline look like for these occupations? So the biggest, I guess the first challenge is just assessing the rural workforce, because rural means there's so many different variations of rural. There's a whole urban-rural continuum. And for example, here's one of the charts from, I concentrated on 3 states, Montana, North Carolina, and Colorado, and mapped these out. And you can see that the lighter orange is the completely rural. There's some deviation of urban and rural combinations in counties. So it's very hard to delineate, okay, this is exactly the rural area, and let me look at the workforce there. And of course, the nature of jobs, in rural areas, people may have more than one job, they may travel long distances for employment. So looking at a geographic area or one county is not the best. You need to really look at the region. And so is that data available? Can it be sliced at the region? And sometimes it's not available. So what I used is non-metropolitan areas, and you'll see some examples of those further down, and you'll see the issues with that. And then the last, okay, let's move this down, is of course the worker shortages. So there's just so much demand for workers in the healthcare field, and depending on what the specialization of the rural area is. For some of it is tourism, and there may be a lack of workers there. So those kind of take over the needs of the workforce development efforts there. So let's go back to the methodology screen here. And so now we're gonna, we talked about those feeder occupations, and we're gonna go through those, and we're gonna crosswalk with the standard occupational classification codes, and then we're gonna check these with the classification of instructional programs, CIP codes. I'll tell you what those are. Then we'll do some analysis, and then we'll come up with some occupations. So looking at these core feeder applications, yes, somebody raised their hand. Okay. Yes, I see some of the reflected below. Okay, these are current jobs in ONET with relevance to the adaptation, not the adaptation jobs itself. You see climate change project program development specialist. And no, there's no climate change project program development specialist on ONET. Yeah. So we're really defining what it is in this project. Okay. Okay, this free meeting will end in 10 minutes, Kyla. Okay. All right. So let's look at this very quickly then. So in ONET, these are the definitions of the occupations that I listed in the profile, right? And these all have these codes, and they're very specific. As they move into the standard occupational codes, they sometimes get collapsed. But for example, if you see landscape architects, there's an associated SOC code for landscape architects. For civil engineers, of course. But look, here's the climate change policy analyst. The code for this one, and it gets lumped into this environmental scientists and specialists, as well as the environmental restoration planners and other environmental sciences over here. So one of the things I saw was that there's this sustainability specialist. The SOC code for that is called Business Operations Specialist Other. And that makes sense because they are part of the business operations, right? But there could be many types of people in that group. So pulling out the sustainability specialist is going to be very hard. But so we've identified these major groups, and they're management occupations, architecture and engineering occupations, and life, physical, and social science occupations. Okay. So are we choosing the right ones? Well, so what I did next is I looked at the classification of instructional programs. Okay, what does that mean? So these are the educational programs. Every college, associate's degree, has a code associated with it in terms of the major, right? So then we can track people in their majors. So we know how many urban planners are completing their programs. We know how many people take this hazard mitigation certificate or whatever. So what's interesting is that some of these occupation codes may have one or two CIP codes. So when we looked at this climate change analyst, there's a new climate change instructional program code. So that was very interesting. Of course, I did a search on that code and only 3 universities came up. So that means that there's quite a bit of a lag in that. So there's no graduates yet, or institutions haven't made the switch. And there was also an art and adaptation program in Detroit, I believe. So that was very interesting. But what I saw here was that the sustainability specialists, they have the code for the instructional program in sustainability, but their crosswalk did not go to business operations, but to natural science managers. So that's why I have it there in parentheses. So then I lumped sustainability specialists into this natural science managers. Okay, so then I applied this to the non-metropolitan areas of each of my 3 states that I looked at and said, okay, do we have these people there? And we do. We have civil engineers, landscape architects. We have a little bit of everything, except, well, there's some that we don't have, but the climatologists don't show up here. So could we be targeting upskilling these people in these rural areas? So these non-metropolitan areas, you'll see an example of this, but in Colorado, there are 3 of them. There's Eastern, Southern Colorado, Northwest Colorado, and Southwest Colorado. In Montana's, there's 3 as well. In North Carolina, there are 4. So you can see that for example, in North Carolina, in the Southeast, there's 210 civil engineers, and there's 40 emergency management directors. So, so this would be, so then should we, another question of, or continuing the question, can we focus on upskilling in these target states? And so then what I did is I actually looked at these occupations and then did a national, I did a national search on location quotient. And location quotients are the degree of specialization in a region. So for example, if you have a score of a 1, that means that, let's say, consulting firms that do adaptation planning, the number of them are the same as nationally. Over a 1 means that there's a concentration of those kinds of businesses in that area. So look what we have in here for water resource specialists. In North Carolina, we have a 169, and there's a 2.2 for landscape architects in Colorado. So there's a lot. There are a lot of climatologists in Colorado, but perhaps they're not the right ones, and not in the right industry for us. So, and then we see hydrologists 8.16, and then as well as in Colorado. So I kind of charted those, and across the board, natural resources managers, occupations that fall under this standard occupation code could be a way to focus or to investigate more, how we can upskill these people, and or any of these other combinations. All right, so when we have this SOC code, then we can do more of looking at employment projections and how jobs change. And the employment projections are, don't take anything into account like, federal funding or anything. They just give us I think the best thing that they do is they give us an idea of how many people are leaving the occupation and how many new entrants will be needed on an annual basis. And for some states, I was able to look at some of the median wage. All right, so let's look at another approach for assessing the rural workforce. And so we talked about location quotient, and so this is what we did. So this is a map of Colorado, and they actually have all these rural regions in their workforce development planning. The gray are the metropolitan areas, so everything else is non-metropolitan. And so for this part here, the Northwest Colorado, we have mining and tourism as with high LQs, and forest and conservation technicians. So could we just focus on the tourism industry, or could we single out a forest and conservation technicians as upskilling into climate adaptation? That is not a professional program, so so those are kind of questions I have. So in East Central Montana, so you can see that these are the 3 areas in Montana: the West, the Southwest, and the East Central. But East Central is huge. It's 32 counties, but this is how I can pull workforce statistics on a rural area. In some states, we can pull it out based on their workforce development area. Montana is great. We can pull data based on reservations. But to get to the data for this project, I can only do it at this geography. So this one is heavily mining, but there's forestry, conservation, farming, and postal workers. So what about these industries? Should we just focus in on these land-based industries. Okay, in Northeast coastal North Carolina, this is this was very hard because there were kind of definitions to the rule, right? North Carolina is what you see in the green is all the metro area, and you can see Virginia up here. So these are the non-metropolitan areas. But if you look at some of these, they're mixed in.